The first gunshot of the night echoed across Sweetwater Creek just as Penelope Jameson's water broke, a cruel coincidence that would forever mark the beginning of her daughter's life. It was April 1878, a time when the West was still wild and unforgiving, especially for a woman alone. "Please, not now," Penelope whispered, clutching her swollen belly as she slumped against the wall of her small cabin. At 22, she had never imagined she'd be facing childbirth alone, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but the howling wind and distant gunfire for company. 6 hours later, as dawn broke over the Montana landscape, Penelope held her newborn daughter in trembling arms. The baby's cries filled the cabin, healthy, strong wails that should have brought joy. Instead, Penelope's tears fell onto the infant's face as exhaustion and fear overwhelmed her. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're nothing but a burden I can't bear." The words had barely left her lips when a knock sounded at her door. Penelope froze, clutching the baby tighter to her chest. Nobody visited this far out, nobody except trouble. "Madam, I heard crying. You all right in there?" The voice was deep, concerned, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from these parts originally. Penelope remained silent, hoping he'd leave. The baby, however, let out another wail. "Madam, I'm coming in if you don't answer. You sound like you need help." The door creaked open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. Dust covered his clothes, and a wide-brimmed hat sat low on his head. A cowboy, from the looks of him, with broad shoulders and a cautious stance. "Stay back," Penelope warned, though her voice lacked strength. "I've got a rifle." The man stepped inside anyway, slowly removing his hat. "No, madam, you don't. Your rifle's hanging on those hooks by the door, and you're holding a baby." His face came into view, weathered but young, maybe 26 or 27, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in such rough surroundings. "Name's Beau Valiente. I was passing through when I heard gunfire last night. Thought I'd check if everyone was safe come morning." His eyes fell to the newborn in her arms, and his expression softened. "Looks like you've had a rough night." Penelope couldn't hold back a bitter laugh that dissolved into a sob. "You could say that." "You got anyone to help you?" he asked, remaining by the door, keeping his distance. She shook her head, not bothering to hide her tears. "My husband died 3 months ago. Fever took him. I'm alone with—" She looked down at the baby. "With this burden I never asked for." Beau stepped further into the cabin, his movements slow and deliberate. "That's no burden, madam. That right there might just be your greatest gift." Penelope looked up sharply. "Gift? Easy for you to say. You don't have to figure out how to feed her, protect her, raise her in this God-forsaken place." "No, I don't," he agreed, surprising her with his candor. "But I know something about unexpected blessings." He gestured toward the stove. "Mind if I make you something to eat? You look like you could use it." Too exhausted to argue, Penelope nodded. As Beau moved around her small kitchen with surprising efficiency, she studied him. His clothes were worn but clean, his movements confident but not threatening. When he spoke, his voice carried no judgment, only a calm certainty that both irritated and comforted her. "I'm passing through to Billings," he explained as he worked. "Got a job waiting there, ranch hand for the Hargrove spread." "You're a long way off course," Penelope noted, adjusting the baby against her shoulder. "Storm pushed me east. Lost my bearings for a spell." He placed a steaming mug of coffee before her. "What's your name, if you don't mind me asking?" Penelope Jameson." Beau nodded. "And the little one?" Penelope looked down at her daughter, suddenly realizing she hadn't even named her yet. "She doesn't have a name." "Well, she's bound to need one sooner or later," Beau said with a gentle smile. "Even the greatest gifts need names." Penelope wanted to argue again about his characterization of her daughter, but fatigue overtook her. Before she knew it, tears were streaming down her face again. "I can't do this. I can't." Beau set down the pan he was holding and approached her, kneeling at a respectful distance. "Miss Jameson, I know it feels impossible right now, but you're stronger than you think." He hesitated, then added, "I can stay a few days, help you get your bearings, if you want." Penelope should have said no. She should have sent this stranger on his way. but something in his eyes, an earnestness that couldn't be faked, made her nod. "Just until I'm back on my feet," she said firmly. "Just until then," he agreed. Beau Valiente ended up staying for 3 days, which stretched into a week. He repaired the leaking roof, chopped enough firewood to last a month, and taught Penelope how to use the rifle properly. Most importantly, he showed her how to care for little Rose, the name Penelope finally chose for her daughter. "See how she turns toward the sound of your voice?" Beau pointed out one evening, as Penelope fed the baby. "She knows you already, knows you're her mother." Penelope felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. "She's going to be nothing but trouble, I can tell." "The best kind of trouble," Beau agreed with a grin, "the kind that makes life worth living." On the morning of the 8th day, Beau packed his few belongings onto his horse. "I should get to Billings. That job won't wait forever." Penelope stood in the doorway, Rose cradled against her chest. The panic she'd felt at the thought of being alone had subsided somewhat, replaced by a different kind of unease at the idea of Beau leaving. "Thank you," she said simply. "We would have been in a bad way without your help." Beau adjusted his hat, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You'd have managed. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for, Penelope Jameson." As he mounted his horse, Penelope found herself stepping forward. "Beau, if you're ever passing back this way," he tipped his hat, "I'll be sure to check in on you and little Rose." His eyes lingered on the baby, a wistfulness in his expression that Penelope couldn't quite interpret. "Take care of that gift of yours." As she watched him ride away, Penelope felt a strange mixture of relief and loss. For the first time in days, she looked down at Rose without that crushing sense of dread. "Just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "Let's see if we can make it work." 2 months passed in relative calm. Rose grew stronger daily, and Penelope established a routine that, while exhausting, was manageable. She even ventured into town once, strapping Rose to her chest and riding the old mare that had been her husband's pride. The trip was necessary. Supplies were running low, and Penelope needed to sell some of the furniture she'd sewn over the winter. Silver Creek was hardly more than a wide spot in the road, a general store, saloon, small church, and a handful of buildings that served as both homes and businesses. As Penelope tied her horse outside the general store, she noticed the stares. A young woman alone with a baby was cause enough for gossip, but a widow in these parts was also seen as either vulnerable prey or a prime marriage prospect. "Mrs. Jameson," the shopkeeper, Mr. Hendricks, greeted her with surprise. "We'd wondered if you'd moved on after Thomas passed." "No, Mr. Hendricks, still at the cabin." She shifted Rose in her arms. "I've brought some linens to sell, and I need supplies." The older man's eyes softened at the sight of the baby. "So, the little one arrived. Congratulations." Penelope nodded, still uncomfortable with congratulations for something that had felt more like a catastrophe than a blessing. "Yes, this is Rose." As Mr. Hendricks examined her needlework, the bell above the door jingled. Penelope turned to see 3 rough-looking men enter, trail dust covering their clothes and hard expressions on their faces, the kind of men who brought trouble with them wherever they went. "Well, well," the tallest one said, his eyes fixing on Penelope. "Ain't you a pretty sight in this sorry excuse for a town?" Penelope turned away, hoping they'd lose interest. Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat nervously. "I'll give you $12 for the lot, Mrs. Jameson. That fair?" Before she could answer, one of the men moved closer. "Mrs., is it? Where's your husband, pretty lady?" "Not here," Penelope said curtly, accepting the money from Mr. Hendricks with a trembling hand. "Now, if you'll excuse me." "No, I don't think I will," the man said, blocking her path. "A woman like you shouldn't be alone, especially with a little one." He reached toward Rose, and Penelope stepped back quickly. "Please move," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You heard the lady." The voice from the doorway made everyone turn. Beau Valiente stood there, his stance relaxed, but his eyes hard as flint as he stared down the 3 men. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the tall man sneered. "I'm making it my business," Beau replied, his hand resting casually near his holster. "The lady asked you to move." For a tense moment, Penelope was certain violence would erupt in the small store. Then the man spat on the floor and stepped aside. Ain't worth the trouble anyway. Beau didn't move until Penelope had safely exited the store, then followed her out to where her horse was tied. "What are you doing here?" she asked, relief and confusion battling in her voice. "I thought you were in Billings." Beau shrugged, taking the supplies from her arms and securing them to her saddle. "Job fell through. Owner's son came back from back east, wanted to try his hand at ranching. His eyes found Rose, and a genuine smile spread across his face. Look at you, little lady, growing like a weed." Penelope studied him, suspicion creeping in. "That doesn't explain why you're in Silver Creek." Beau had the grace to look sheepish. "Truth is, I was heading back to check on you two anyway. Figured I'd see if you needed any more help before I moved on." "We're managing just fine," Penelope said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Course you are," Beau agreed easily. "But winter's coming. Might be nice to have an extra pair of hands around." Penelope wanted to refuse. The last thing she needed was to rely on a drifter who would inevitably leave again. But the memory of those 3 men in the store and the long, lonely nights in the cabin with only Rose for company weakened her resolve. "I can't pay you much," she warned. "Room and board's enough," he replied, "just until you're properly settled." As they rode back to the cabin together, Penelope couldn't help noticing how natural it felt to have Beau riding alongside her, how his presence eased a tightness in her chest she hadn't even realized was there. By the time the first snow fell in late October, Beau had become an indispensable part of their small household. He built a proper stable for the horses, reinforced the cabin walls against the bitter Montana winter, and even constructed a cradle for Rose that was far more elegant than anything Penelope could have managed. "Where did you learn to work wood like this?" she asked one evening, running her hand along the smooth curve of the cradle. Beau looked up from the fire he was tending. "My father was a carpenter back in Texas, taught me everything he knew before he passed." "Why did you become a cowboy instead of following his trade?" A shadow crossed his face. "Restlessness, I guess. After the war, seemed like everyone was heading west to start over. I was no different." Penelope placed Rose in the cradle, watching as the baby's eyes drifted closed. "Were you in the war? You seem too young." "Caught the tail end of it. Lied about my age to enlist when I was 16. He poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "Saw enough to know I never wanted to see more." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and Rose's soft breathing. Penelope found herself studying Beau's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "What?" he asked, catching her stare. Penelope looked away quickly. "Nothing. Just thinking it's nice not to be alone tonight." She gestured toward the window, where snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes. "Storms are always worse when you're by yourself." Beau nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My mother used to say that storms are God's way of reminding us to seek shelter with those we care about." "Is that why you came back?" The question slipped out before Penelope could stop it. "Were you seeking shelter?" Beau's gaze held hers for a long moment. "Maybe I was. Or maybe I just couldn't stop thinking about a woman who called her greatest blessing a burden." Penelope's cheeks flushed. "I was scared, exhausted. I didn't mean—" "You don't need to explain," Beau interrupted gently. "Fear makes us say things we don't mean. I'm just glad I was passing by when I was." "So am I," Penelope admitted softly. As winter settled in earnest over the Montana territory, Penelope found herself growing accustomed to Beau's presence. He slept in the small lean-to attached to the cabin, giving her and Rose privacy while staying close enough to help if needed. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm, Beau handling the outdoor chores, Penelope managing the household and caring for Rose, both of them sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. On Christmas Eve, Beau surprised her by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Penelope asked, hesitant to accept it. "Just a little something for Rose's first Christmas," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "It's nothing much." Penelope unwrapped the package to find a small wooden horse, carved with exquisite detail. "Beau, this is beautiful." Figured every Montana child should have a horse, he said with a smile, even if it's just a wooden one to start. Penelope placed the toy in Rose's eager hands, watching as her daughter immediately tried to put it in her mouth. I didn't get you anything, she said apologetically. You've given me a place to be for the winter, Beau replied. That's gift enough. Penelope hesitated, then reached for something on the shelf behind her. Actually, I did make this. It's not much, but... She handed him a knitted scarf, the blue yarn matching his eyes. Beau took it reverently, as if she'd given him gold instead of simple wool. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He wrapped it around his neck immediately. Best gift I've had in years. Something shifted between them that night, a tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had been there all along, but neither had acknowledged. When their fingers brushed as they passed dishes at dinner, Penelope felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. When Beau's eyes lingered on her as she sang Rose to sleep, she found herself wondering what it would be like to have him look at her that way forever. The thought frightened her. She'd loved Thomas, had mourned him deeply, but their marriage had been one of convenience and mutual respect more than passion. What she felt stirring for Beau was different, riskier, wilder, more likely to lead to heartbreak when he inevitably moved on. January brought a bitter cold snap that kept them mostly confined to the cabin. Rose was teething, her discomfort making her fussy and difficult to console. After 3 nights of minimal sleep, Penelope was at her breaking point. Give her to me, Beau said, reaching for the crying baby. Get some rest. She won't settle for anyone but me, Penelope protested, though her exhausted body was already surrendering the child. To her surprise, Rose quieted almost immediately in Beau's arms. He walked the floor with her, humming a tune Penelope didn't recognize, his large hand patting the baby's back with surprising gentleness. How did you do that? Penelope asked, watching in amazement. Beau smiled down at Rose, who was now contentedly gumming his shirt collar. Little ones can sense when you're tired or frustrated. Sometimes they just need a change of arms. He looked up at Penelope. Go on, get some sleep. We'll be fine. Too exhausted to argue, Penelope retreated to her bed. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Beau sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, Rose nestled against his chest, both of them looking perfectly content. When she woke hours later, the cabin was quiet. For a moment, panic seized her. Had Beau taken Rose and left? But then she heard their voices, or rather, Beau's voice and Rose's happy babbling coming from the main room. She rose quietly and peered through the partially open door. Beau sat at the table, Rose propped on his knee. He was showing her something the wooden horse he'd carved her, moving it across the table as if it were galloping. And that's how you ride, little lady, he was saying. Someday your mama will teach you for real. She's a fine horsewoman, your mama. Rose reached for the toy, laughing when Beau made it jump over her tiny hand. You know something, Rosie? Beau continued, unaware of Penelope watching. I never thought much about having a family of my own. Figured that wasn't in the cards for a man like me. But being here with you and your mama... He paused, a vulnerability in his expression that made Penelope's heart ache. Well, it makes a man wonder what he's been missing all these years. Rose responded by grabbing his finger and trying to pull it to her mouth, making Beau laugh. Yeah, I know. Big thoughts for early morning, huh? Let's get you some breakfast before your mama wakes up. Penelope retreated silently, her mind racing with what she'd just witnessed. The tenderness Beau showed Rose, the wistfulness in his voice when he spoke of family. It was dangerous to hope these things meant what she wanted them to mean. February brought a brief thaw, allowing Beau to make a trip into town for supplies. He returned with not only the necessities, but also a letter for Penelope. Postmaster said it came in last week, he explained, handing her the envelope. Penelope recognized her sister's handwriting immediately. Patricia lived in St. Louis with her husband and 3 children, a proper city life that she'd been urging Penelope to consider since Thomas's death. As she read the letter, her expression grew troubled. Bad news? Beau asked, unpacking the supplies. Not exactly, Penelope replied slowly. My sister is inviting us to come live with them in St. Louis. She says they have plenty of room, and that Rose deserves to grow up with other children and proper schooling. Beau's hands stilled. You thinking of accepting? Penelope looked around the small cabin that had been her home for nearly 3 years. I don't know. There's not much future for us here. The land's too poor for proper farming, and I can't run it alone indefinitely. You're not alone now, Beau pointed out quietly. Their eyes met across the room. For now, Penelope acknowledged. But you'll move on eventually. That's your nature. A flash of hurt crossed Beau's face. Is that what you think of me? That I'm just passing through your life? Isn't that what you do? Penelope challenged. You said yourself you've been restless since the war. What's to keep you here when spring comes and the trail's clear? Beau crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. You want to know what would keep me here? You, Rose, this life we've been building. I haven't stayed this winter out of charity or because I had nowhere else to go. I've stayed because, for the first time since I can remember, I feel like I'm home. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Beau, no, let me finish. I know I'm not much. I don't have land or money or prospects beyond what I can earn with my hands, but I care for you, Penelope, for both of you. And if you wanted me to stay, really stay, I would. The raw honesty in his voice stripped away Penelope's defenses. I'm afraid, she admitted, of relying on someone again, of building a life only to have it taken away. Beau's hand found hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise I won't willingly leave you, not unless you ask me to go. Rose chose that moment to wake from her nap, her demanding cries breaking the tension. Penelope stepped back, needing space to think. I need time, she said. This isn't just about me. Beau nodded, releasing her hand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. The following weeks were charged with unspoken possibilities. Beau continued his chores as always, but there was a new carefulness to his interactions with Penelope, as if he feared pushing too hard might drive her away. For her part, Penelope found herself watching him more closely, the way he'd begun planting an early garden, despite the risk of late frost. How he mended the fence around the property, as if he planned to be there to maintain it for years to come, the gentle way he always had with Rose. One evening in early March, as they sat by the fire after Rose had been put to bed, Penelope finally broached the subject they'd been dancing around. If we stayed, what would that look like to you? Beau looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling. Honestly? Penelope nodded. I'd ask to court you properly, take you to town for dinner or church socials when we could arrange it. I'd work this land until it yielded enough to support us comfortably, build onto the cabin as our family grew. He set aside his project, his expression earnest. I'd raise Rose as my own, make sure she never doubted she was wanted and loved. And I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you'd be placing in me. Penelope's throat tightened with emotion. And if I decided to go to St. Louis instead? Pain flashed in Beau's eyes, but he answered steadily. Then I'd help you pack, make sure you and Rose had a safe journey, and wish you well. You wouldn't come with us? Beau shook his head slowly. I don't belong in a city, Penelope, never have, but more importantly, I wouldn't follow where I wasn't invited. Your sister asked you to come live with her family. She didn't extend that invitation to a drifter you took in for the winter. The honesty of his assessment struck Penelope. He was right. Patricia's letter had made no mention of Beau accompanying them, had in fact suggested that in St. Louis, Penelope might find a suitable gentleman to give Rose a proper father. What if I invited you? She asked softly. Beau's expression softened. Are you? I'm asking what you would say if I did. He considered this for a moment. I'd say that I'd follow you anywhere if it meant being with you and Rose, but I'd also ask if that's truly what you want to leave the life you've built here, the independence you've fought for. Penelope rose from her chair and moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. The snow was receding, revealing patches of earth that would soon burst with new life. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. When Rose was born, I was terrified I couldn't protect her, provide for her. I called her a burden because I couldn't see past my own fear. She turned back to face Beau. But you saw her differently from the start. You called her my greatest gift, and you were right. She changed everything. She took a deep breath. And then you came along and changed things again. Beau stood, his eyes never leaving hers. Is that good or bad? It's terrifying, Penelope admitted with a small laugh. But it's also wonderful. I never expected to feel this way again, to look forward to each day, to imagine a future that feels full of possibility instead of dread. Beau took a cautious step toward her. Penelope, are you saying... I'm saying I don't want to go to St. Louis. I want to stay here, with you, and see what kind of life we can build together. The words rushed out of her, bringing with them a sense of rightness that confirmed she'd made the correct choice. If you still want that too? The smile that broke across Beau's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. I have never wanted anything more in my life. When their lips met, Penelope felt something lock into place, a certainty that had been missing from her life for too long. Beau's arms encircled her, strong and secure, and she leaned into him, allowing herself to trust in this new beginning. From Rose's cradle came a soft coo, as if the baby were adding her approval to the moment. They broke apart, laughing softly, and moved together to look down at the child who had, in her own way, brought them together. She really is beautiful, Beau murmured, reaching down to stroke Rose's cheek. Just like her mother. Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder. She's going to need a good father. Beau's arm tightened around her waist. I'll do my best to be one. As spring bloomed across the Montana landscape, so too did the relationship between Beau and Penelope. True to his word, Beau courted her properly, taking her to town for Sunday services, arranging for a neighbor woman to watch Rose so they could have an occasional evening meal at Silver Creek's small hotel restaurant, bringing her wildflowers he found while working the land. By the time Rose took her first steps in May, tottering unsteadily across the cabin floor into Beau's waiting arms, Penelope knew without doubt that what had begun as an arrangement of convenience had blossomed into genuine love. I think it's time I made an honest woman of you, Beau said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Rose was already asleep inside, exhausted from a day of practicing her new walking skills. Penelope turned to him, amusement in her eyes. Is that a proposal, Beau Valiente? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it in his closed fist. Not a very good one, I suppose. I had a whole speech planned, but now that the moment's here, I can't remember a word of it. Try, Penelope encouraged softly. Beau took a deep breath. Penelope Jameson, when I first saw you, you were crying over your newborn daughter, calling her a burden you couldn't bear. I knew right then that you were the strongest, most honest woman I'd ever met. It took courage to admit your fear, to face it head on, instead of pretending everything was fine. He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band. I can't promise our life will be easy. The West is still wild, and farming is always a gamble. But I can promise that you and Rose will never have to face any burden alone again. Not as long as I draw breath. I will love you both until my dying day, and consider it the greatest privilege of my life to do so. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as she extended her trembling hand. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times, yes. As Beau slipped the ring onto her finger, he asked, Are you sure? I'm still just a cowboy who happened to be passing through. Penelope shook her head, cupping his face in her hands. No, you're the man who showed me that what I thought was my greatest burden was actually my greatest blessing. You're the man who taught me to hope again, to believe in second chances. You're the man I love, and the father Rose deserves. Their kiss sealed the promise, sweet and sure, under the vast Montana sky. They married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with Rose toddling down the aisle ahead of Penelope, scattering wildflower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the handful of neighbors who had begun to form a community around their small homestead. That night, after Rose had been tucked into her cradle, Beau carried Penelope across the threshold of the cabin, their home now, truly and legally. Welcome home, Mrs. Valiente, he murmured against her hair. Penelope looked around the cabin, seeing not its limitations but its possibilities. The corner where Beau had already begun constructing bookshelves for the children they hoped to have. the new curtains she'd sewn to brighten the windows, the cradle where Rose slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was loved. "I am home," Penelope replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss her husband. "I've been home since the day you walked through the door and called my daughter a gift." As summer ripened into autumn, their little family settled into the rhythms of life together. Beau proved to be a natural farmer, coaxing surprising bounty from land that had previously yielded little. Penelope's skill with needle and thread brought in additional income as word spread of her fine work. Rose grew and thrived, her first words "mama" and "papa" bringing tears to both her parents' eyes. On Rose's first birthday, as they celebrated with a small cake Penelope had baked, Beau presented his daughter with another carved wooden animal to join her growing collection. "A family of horses," he explained, as Rose examined the three figures, a stallion, a mare, and a foal, "just like our family." Penelope watched them together, her heart full to bursting. "She adores you," she observed. "Sometimes I think she forgets you haven't always been her father." Beau looked up, his expression solemn. "In all the ways that matter, I have been. From the moment I held her, I knew she was mine to protect and love." "Even when I called her a burden?" Penelope asked, still occasionally haunted by those first desperate words. "Especially then," Beau replied, reaching for her hand, "because that's when you both needed me most, even if you didn't know it yet." That night, after Rose was asleep, Penelope shared news of her own with Beau. "I think our little family won't be quite so little come spring," she said, guiding his hand to rest on her still flat stomach. The wonder that spread across Beau's face was a sight Penelope knew she would treasure forever. "Really? You're sure?" She nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "Careful! There are fragile goods here." Beau set her down gently, his hands still cradling her waist. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." "The second of many gifts, I hope," Penelope said, leaning into his embrace. "The greatest riches a man could ask for," Beau agreed. As winter once again blanketed their small corner of Montana, Penelope often found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. From the desperate young widow facing childbirth alone to the confident woman she was now, secure in her husband's love and their shared vision for the future. Rose continued to thrive, her personality emerging more clearly each day, stubborn like her mother, kind-hearted like her father. With a laugh that could brighten even the coldest winter day, Beau expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Rose and a nursery for the baby to come, working tirelessly to ensure their home would be ready for its newest member. In late April 1880, almost exactly 2 years after Rose's birth, Penelope gave birth to a son they named Thomas Beauregard Valiente, honoring both her first husband and the man who had given her a second chance at happiness. "He's perfect," Beau whispered, cradling his newborn son with the same reverence he'd shown Rose. "Thank you for this gift." Penelope smiled tiredly from the bed, watching as Rose climbed carefully beside her to peer at her new brother. "What do you think, Rosie? Is he a good gift or a burden?" Rose considered the baby solemnly, then declared with all the wisdom of her 2 years, "Gift, Mama, like Papa says." Beau's eyes met Penelope's over their children's heads, love and pride shining in his gaze. "Your Papa is right about that," Penelope agreed. "The very best gifts sometimes come disguised as burdens, until someone helps us see them clearly." As the years passed, the Valiente family flourished. Their farm expanded, becoming one of the most productive in the area. Rose grew into a confident, capable young woman with her mother's determination and her father's compassionate heart. Thomas, known as Tommy, proved to be as skilled with horses as Beau had been in his cowboy days. 2 more children joined the family daughters, Emma and Charlotte, completing their circle of love. On Rose's 18th birthday, as they celebrated with neighbors and friends in the large farmhouse that had replaced the original cabin, Beau pulled Penelope aside for a moment of privacy. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Though his hair now showed strands of silver and lines had formed at the corners of his eyes, he was still as handsome to her as the day he'd first walked through her door. "Which day?" Penelope asked, though she knew exactly which one he meant. The day Rose was born. The day you thought your life was over, and instead, it was just beginning. Penelope leaned against him, watching across the room, as Rose laughed with Tommy, helping her younger brother serve cake to their guests. I think about it often, she admitted. How close I came to giving up. How fortunate I was that a certain cowboy happened to be passing by. Beau's lips brushed her temple. Not fortune, fate. Either way, Penelope said, turning in his arms to face him. You were right, and I was wrong. What I thought was my greatest burden turned out to be your greatest gift, they finished together, the phrase that had become something of a family motto over the years. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the younger children were in bed, Rose found her parents sitting on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. May I join you? She asked, settling beside them when they nodded. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the squeak of the swing and the chirp of crickets the only sounds. Then Rose spoke, her voice thoughtful. Papa told me once about the day you met, about how afraid you were, Mama, and how he knew right away that I was special. Penelope exchanged a look with Beau. They had never hidden the truth from Rose about her birth, or the circumstances of their meeting, believing that honesty was the foundation of their family. Your father saw what I was too frightened to see, Penelope acknowledged. That you were the beginning of something wonderful, not the end. Rose smiled, taking each of their hands in hers. I'm glad he was passing by that day. I can't imagine our lives any other way. Neither can I, Beau said, squeezing her hand. Every trail I rode, every wrong turn I took, they were all leading me here, to you both. As Rose excused herself to go inside, Penelope nestled closer to her husband, grateful for the warmth of his embrace against the cooling evening air. You know, she said softly, I received a letter from Patricia yesterday. She and William are planning to visit this summer. Beau raised an eyebrow. Your sister is finally willing to venture into the wilderness? Penelope laughed. Apparently so. She says she wants to see for herself this remarkable life I've described in my letters all these years. And what will you show her? Penelope gestured toward their prosperous farm, the comfortable home they'd built, the evidence everywhere of a life well lived and richly blessed. Everything, our home, our children, our community. She turned to face him, her hands framing the beloved face she knew better than her own. Most importantly, I'll show her you the man who taught me that what looks like a burden is often life's greatest gift, if only we have the courage to receive it. Beau's kiss was as sweet and promising as it had been on that long-ago day when he'd first proposed. I love you, Penelope Valiente, he murmured against her lips, more with each passing day. And I love you, she replied, my cowboy, my husband, my greatest, most unexpected gift. Above them, the Montana stars shone down on the home and family they had built, together a testament to the power of love to transform burden into blessing, fear into faith, and chance encounters into destiny.